So when you open the editor, you arrive at this view. And let's have a quick look what you see here. On the left, you see all your model elements. So all the things you created, you can see and manage here on the left side. On the right side, for example, now we're in the diagram, you can step in and edit those different elements. For example, we call this our first diagram. Perfect. And in the middle, you have your diagram space, so where you model all your elements. And with that said, let's dive right into. On the top, for example, you can select and define your first method. In our case, let's call this first method the requirements definition method. If you have this requirements definition method, you can add a lot of stuff here. For example, you can add steps. So this is on the right side here. You can name the steps. You can select an input output, which we have a look in a few seconds on. And you can also, if you expand all, you can describe your step. You can add a certain link, for example, to a document or a website or whatever you wish someone sees when looking at this step. So when you define the steps, you can start and modeling inputs and outputs. For example, for our requirements definition method, I can add a document, I can put it just somewhere in my diagram space, or I can link it directly to my method. So for example, an input for my requirements definition method is, of course, or are the stakeholder needs. Stakeholder needs. So I define that as an input. Another input, for example, you can put it right in the method to begin with, just to model it faster. Another input would be some design constraints, for example. Constraints. Perfect. So we have now defined the inputs to our requirements definition method. When the inputs are defined, we of course have to have a look at our outputs. And in this case, a new document as an output is created, and the output here in our case, for example, is the requirement list. A method most of the time is supported by a tool, and you can find a tool up here and of course again link it to your method. In our case, the requirement definition method is supported by a, of course, requirement tool. And of course, our method is always part of a bigger process. And therefore you can put in a process here, and this is based off your individual organizational structure and in which process you want to embed this method. You can define the process aspect, of course, here. But we, of course, do not want to look at a method itself or in isolation. The big benefit of Memodya is to see the combination with other methods and how the data is transported between those. So we take out here our second method. And this would be, in our case, let's call it the software design method. For the software design method, of course, we need the input from the last method. So the output from our requirements definition, the requirements list, can therefore be linked to our software design because we need that as an input. And also our design constraints, we can take that from the left sidebar. We take our design constraints because we want the software design team to have a closer look at them again and can add them as an input for this method. The output of our design software design method is, for example, a model. And the model would then be, for example, and of course there are many, you can design the GUI and stuff like that, but let's call it just the class diagram here for simplicity reasons. Class diagram. You have the model right here. Again, of course, then you have a certain tool which supports you with your software design. It's some I just call it here very generically, software design tool. There are many specific ones, you know which one you're working in, just name it here. And of course, the software design method is also part or an activity of a bigger process. So you can add in here your process again. One more thing I want to show you at this point is that you can create many diagrams. So we are here in the first diagram, and you can go to the diagram section and add a new diagram. With double click, you open this, and then you have a whole new space to model, but you can also link it to your other diagrams within your Memo. And for example, I can take a method which I created before because I also need it for this process. So I can take the requirements definition method I created in the other diagram and put it right in. So I don't have to model it anymore. I have everything exactly the same. And then, for example, I can add another method. Beforehand, we looked at the software design method. Now let's work with the mechanical design method, just for example. And here again, we can link the inputs and outputs from the requirement list to the mechanical design, and also the design constraints we can take in that it's an output for our mechanical design team. The output of your mechanical design method is usually a CAD model nowadays. Let's call it that, CAD model. And this is supported by some CAD tool, which I just name here very generally, but you of course can name your specific tool, CAD tool. And this is all part of a certain mechanical design process. So of course, we now have only designed 3 methods. So for this, it doesn't necessarily make sense to make 2 different diagrams. But if you think of a complex development of mechatronic systems, you can think of how you want to structure your diagrams and your methods to really have a good working basis for your teams.